Elon Lipton and Scott Hunter. Elon is my manager, so if you could force him into increasing my salary, that's fine. I will like you all. He can also fire me, okay?
I'll take votes later on.
He's the lead manager of development on the ASP.NET team. He handles Web API, Entity Framework, Orchard, ASP.NET, MVC, everything.
Everything out of band.
Everything open source is him. Scott is the product manager lead. That's it. Same thing on the product management thing. So he can kill Orchard. He can fire me, he can kill Orchard. So
we have a lot more power than we realize.
yeah.
I think coming in here, we're like, we'll just talk about some things, but wow, we have.
And they're also very nice. So yeah. So we all.
Anybody ever used Update Panel? Nobody's used.
Update
okay.
panel.
This is the Update Panel guy.
I do want to mention where is Bertrand? Oh, Bertrand couldn't. He had to go pick up his daughters from school. He'll be back later. Bertrand also worked on Update Panel as well. So there's a team effort. One man alone does not an Update Panel.
Does not make an Update Panel.
Yeah. So.
Thank you guys. Great talk. Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Thank you
for coming.
So we thought we'd come and I don't know if anybody saw our announcements at TechEd. A few weeks ago, we actually announced kind of the future of .NET on the server. We have a bunch of crazy stuff going on in the .NET world. Good stuff, I think, and we're going to talk about that today. This is just some kind of .NET stuff in general, kind of interesting stuff that there's like over 1.8 billion installs of .NET active today that we actually know and can track via things like Windows Update and stuff like that we know of machines that are downloaded or phoned home. And we think there's about 6 million developers developing .NET applications on top of the .NET framework. So it's an awesome ecosystem, and we hope to make it better. The dongle does not work. There's a whole bunch of stuff here, and I'll just go through it kind of fast. The only stuff in here that I think is really interesting is one of the things that's important to us, and the ASP.NET team's been doing this for a while, and we want to take it a step further, is we want to innovate and deliver things faster and faster and faster. So one of the goals from us is, when I first joined the team, and Alon and I, we were shipping products about once a year, once every 2 years.
Yeah, if we were lucky.
Now we have stuff up on NuGet about every 3 months. But the .NET framework that we depend on, we don't have that flexibility. I can't go and make a change in .NET 4.5 very fast. That's a multi-month process or even a year process. So we want to make that faster. Looking here, I saw a couple people with Macs in here today. We know that there's a need for cross-platform, and so that's an area that we think is interesting as well. Is how do we take all the stuff you guys are doing with Orchard and .NET and allow that to run on things like Mac and Linux as well? That's interesting to us. And then, of course, you guys are already open source. We're open source. We want to make more of it open source, and so you're going to see a continued investment in us making more and more of .NET open source. You just saw Roslyn, the new C# and VB compiler. We open sourced that at the Build conference. And I think you're going to see that continue to happen as we get into things like even maybe the BCL. What else do I have? That doesn't work.
How many people here use ASP.NET MVC? Okay, you're at the right conference. Just making sure.
I'll just skip through some of this boilerplate. So as I said before, one of the things that's really important to us is .NET innovation. How can we actually innovate faster and faster in .NET? How can we take more bits of .NET, move them out of band, ship them faster? How do we become more open? I think our team is about as open as you can be. Anything we're going to show today, you can go to GitHub and actually try and play with and use today. On the .NET innovation one, an interesting one is, I assume everybody's heard of Roslyn? You people? So Roslyn is something that we started shipping previews of at the Build conference. It's the next generation C# and VB compiler. It's actually written in C#. So it's actually, the compiler is written with its own technology. The cool thing about the Roslyn work is it provides spectacular speed when it comes to things like compilation. So today, you're building an Orchard app and you're running one of these apps. The way we actually work is we go and shell out to a command line and actually run the compiler, and then which writes output to some temporary folder, and then we go load all that stuff and run that stuff. In the world of Roslyn, we can actually just compile the memory. We don't actually need to even touch the disk anymore. We can basically just take source, compile the memory, run directly from memory. You can actually use this today in Visual Studio if you want. If you go find the, I can send links to Sebastian that can send around. There's a public preview of this. It's pretty cool. It's a V6. And the cool thing about being a V6 is you can actually install it into Visual Studio and disable it, and it puts everything back the way it was before. There is no, it's not going to damage your machine, so you can try it out. We also released a NuGet package at the Build conference as well, which enables existing ASP.NET applications to start using Roslyn right away. And so you can use the latest C# features. There's a whole bunch of new C# features that are in there. So you get the speed and compilation, you get the new C# features. You can use it pretty much today with no risk. So I highly recommend checking that out. We also introduced something called the .NET Foundation, and this is kind of where all the open sourceness of .NET is going to happen from a Microsoft perspective. So we're taking all the things that we build, MVC, Web API, SignalR, EF, we're putting all of that stuff into this foundation. The Roslyn compiler's in there. You're going to see more and more of the .NET framework move into there as we open those components up. And I think actually Orchard is something that will go there in the long run as well. So I know we're working on that, but we're moving out away from Outer Curve and into this. This is kind of the place where all .NET open source will be. So as we start talking about the next version of .NET and what we're going to do on the server, there's a couple of points that I'll just graph over right now. One is we want to be modular. Today, if you use ASP.NET, it's this huge pile of stuff, and a lot of it's enabled by default. If you just want to serve a request with the smallest possible amount of code and the smallest possible payload, you can't do that today. We're going to new up an HTTP request, HTTP context object on every request. That's going to use 32K of memory, whether you need it or not, every request. So we want to go find a way to let you dial in as much of the framework as you want. We want to make it easier to move apps from on-prem to the cloud. And I'll drill into that a little bit later as well. We're already open source. We take contributions. We want to make development faster. Today, Control F5 in Visual Studio is an 8 to 9 second experience on my machine. While I can, if I'm playing a Node or PHP, that's a 1 second or 2 second thing. I want to use editors or tools of my choice. And what I mean by that is, as we go to this cloud world, what if you do publish your app up to the cloud and want to edit the app in the cloud using, like in the case of Azure, you can go to the Azure portal, and there's an editor called Monaco in there, and you can edit source code live. Well, there's not really a good way to build your app in the cloud today, so you can go edit the source code, but you're still going to run the old code. So we want to enable that. And as I was saying before, we want to make cross-platform a key component of this, make it run on Mac and Linux. So I'll talk about the faster development cycle first. And that is, obviously we want features to ship as packages. We've been doing that for our frameworks as well for a while, for MVC, Web API, SignalR. But in this new world, the biggest thing we hear from our customers is, I can't use 4.5 or I can't use 4.0 because I'm afraid to put that on a machine because it'll break everything else that's on that machine. So in this new world, we want to actually ship the framework itself as a package, meaning that your entire application is completely self-contained. It does not affect the rest of the machine. It's completely isolated. That's the future model we see. So now, if you want to go to your IT department and say, hey, I want to go put an Orchard running 4.5 up, well, you can put it on any machine in the enterprise. It's not going to break anything else on the machine. So the goal here is letting people take advantage of the newest features we have. When I go and talk to a customer and they say, I can't use the await keyword, I'm like, I cry. That's just terrible. You shouldn't have to wait 2 years to use the await keyword. So we're going to ship the framework as a package. And don't freak out. The framework's not meant to be 200 megs like it is today. If you actually just grab just the x86 version, not the x86 or the x64 version at the same time, it ends up being about 10 megs in this world. So it's a condensed framework. This framework does not contain WinForms and WPF and all the other technology. It's only the server side and web technologies. The next thing is, I don't know if this has happened to anybody in the room, but we have this Windows Update feature that goes and pushes changes to machines. This can be the bane of your existence sometimes. We can patch something in the .NET framework that breaks your application. And we're doing that because it's security or it's a bug. You might take a dependency on a bug and not even know it. And so in the new world, we're only going to patch 0 days. So typically, the ASP.NET team does a 0 day about once a year or once every other year. So we're not going to patch the machines nearly as often. That means if you want the newest version of MVC, you have to come to us and get it. The benefit for you as developers is that means whatever you developed on is exactly what's running in the cloud. No longer is this my server's at some patch level, my development box is at a different patch level. and I see a different behavior when I push my application up. And it gives you more control. Now it's your choice to opt into when you want to take a change from us. As I was saying before, performance is something that's hugely important. So today, startup time. We have I'm sure Orchard has this problem in general. How long does Orchard take to start?
It's lightning fast.
But you've got like a 64 gig with like a RAID SSD and
15 seconds for a default website.
15 seconds? Yeah. So an MVC music store app, which is a sample we have that just is MVC with EF, takes about 15 seconds as well. How do we get that 15 seconds down to 2 or 3 seconds? We want to get that startup time faster. How do we get your apps to run faster on the machine? So as I was saying before, if we're allocating 32K per request, no matter what you do, what if we only allocate 2K per request? That's a huge savings. We have a project on NuGet called Helios, which you can actually run against Web API, and you get about a 90% saving in memory just by not newing up the HTTP context object each time you boot through. The next thing is we want to be modular, as I was saying before. Today we kind of like give you a bunch of features. You get all these features, they're on by default, and if you're crazy, you can go and turn modules off and try to turn some of that stuff off. You might find config switches to turn some of that stuff off. In the new world, and Alon's going to show this, everything is opt-in. If you want to write an app that is basically one line of code that writes hello world out, there's no session state, there's no cache, there's no context, there's nothing. You can do it as bare metal as you want. You can do a combo of that where, hey, I've got this part of my app that has to be super fast, so I'm not even going to use a framework. I'm just going to write it bare metal. But then my admin interface, I want to all be framework, so I actually use a framework like Web API or MVC. And so that's a key tenet of the development plan as well. And then obviously, productivity for developers. As I was saying before, you should be able to edit code, just refresh your browser. And that should be a 1 or 2 second scenario. That should not be a 7 or 8 second scenario like it is today, at least on my hardware. And you should be able to actually edit these things in the cloud or potentially via command line or with editor of your choice. And then finally, cloud. We're actually part of the cloud team at Microsoft. So we want to make it easier to move your app to the cloud. Today, if you move an ASP.NET app to Azure, it feels if you do a demo, it feels great. Yeah, it took 5 seconds and it's up there. Well, until you start using things like session state or cache, well, then you got to go find these NuGet packages. You got to go create a SQL database or an Azure cache, and you got to add a bunch of connection strings. And you might find that when you do that, things like session state or cache, well, they'll run locally without your object being serializable. But when you go to the cloud and you're doing external data source, they need to be serializable. So you start getting crashes. So the app that ran great on premise doesn't run in the cloud. And then things like configuration. Today, what you do is we have this XML file called webconfig, and you create a production and a debug version of this, and we do like XML transformations. Anytime that you have to transform something, that means your stack has a problem, in my opinion. And so envision a world where you actually put your connection strings and stuff in the cloud, which means they're not in your source code. You don't accidentally check them into Get and publish them to the world to see. You're laughing because you've done it. Everybody's done it. Our team's done it. And then finally, when we think of the cloud as well, is once we get you up in the cloud, how do you diagnose your application? Today, what we do is say, oh, yeah, go put your release version up in the cloud. If it doesn't work, compile a debug version, add some tracing and stuff to it. And then if you want to turn that on or off, you can republish your app. The cloud should be as simple as you go to the cloud and you say, turn tracing on, turn tracing off. So we want to get to a model where you can basically go to the cloud and turn on or off this thing. And then I put as a reach goal for the team, we have, I don't know if anybody's seen it, but we actually have the ability, you can publish to Azure today. You can go to the Server Explorer, you can right-click and debug in the cloud seamlessly. So it takes about 15 seconds to boot up, and we do all the remote debugger hookings for you and stuff like that, and you can debug in the cloud. We want to get it so clean that you can actually just control F5 or F5 directly to the cloud and have the cloud be your environment. And then finally, cross-platform, which is super cool to us as well. As I said, there's a Mac in the back of the room over there. I'm the only Mac in the room. We want people on Macs to be able to use .NET. I would love to be able to say you can take Sublime Text, CLI, write a .NET app, publish it to Azure, all from a Mac. That's an important scenario for us. We're not going to demo it. We didn't bring a Mac with us. But the bits that we have today will run on Mono on a Mac and work just fine. And then as I was saying, editors, we won't let you use things like Sublime. We might even, we're actually playing with internally, we're playing to see if we can actually make IntelliSense work in Sublime. So not only would you actually be able to actually develop with an editor on the Mac, but you might actually get full C# IntelliSense and ASP.NET IntelliSense as well. But the prime scenario here again is for us is, I'd love to be able to say you can go to the Azure portal, fix your app in the cloud. You know, if you're on the road, there's a bug, just fix it in the cloud. You don't have to have VS. I mean, VS is still going to be your first-class experience, but you could do small stuff in the cloud. And then we want to be open source. This is kind of the scary slide here. This shows, though, in this vNext world, there's basically two scenarios that you have. One is you can run your application on the big framework that you're familiar with today, exactly like it is today. It's just the next version of MVC, the next version of Web API, the next version of SignalR, EF. Or you can choose to run on that, what we call cloud-optimized version of the .NET Framework. That's the smaller version that does not contain WinForms and WPF and all the things that you technically don't need when you're building a web application. But I want to say, the smaller framework today might have things that are just missing. We only took like 10 megs of the framework and put them in this thing. And so for us, the first version especially is going to be a learning experience. Is there enough stuff in there? For example, if you don't have WinForms, that means you don't have system drawing. If you're using system drawing to do resizing or scaling or watermarks of images, well, you need to go find another alternative to that because system web's not in, not system web, but WinForms, system drawing is not in the smaller version of the framework. So if you look at the feature sets, the cloud-ready scenario that I was talking about, that'll work in both the full .NET and the cloud-optimized .NET. The modular design is going to work the same way as well. Where it's going to start changing is when you get down to the side-by-side. We obviously can't ship the full 200 meg zipped, 400 megs unzipped framework as part of your application. So if you want the side-by-side support, you need to opt in to use the smaller version of the framework. We think that there'll be performance and memory improvements that are in the smaller version of the framework that are not in the big framework, mainly because it's a smaller version of the framework. So some of those benefits will require you to kind of opt out of using the full framework, and our hope is that we can quickly build an ecosystem of packages and stuff to fill in any of the missing components that are not in there. And we'll continue to take features from the full framework and release them, but as we release them, we'll release them as NuGet packages, not as a big monolithic framework. So you can basically, the goal is have the smallest possible framework and then have everything be an ecosystem of packages so you as code authors can actually just opt into exactly what you want. So what this means, this is just a, for example, Orchard today. All of our stack will still continue to run on the full framework like it always has. Web Forms, MVC, Web API, all of those things. If you do move into the new world, which is MVC 6, you will see there are breaking changes. There's a new project system, which we're going to show today. It's actually, I think it's a good breaking change. It's actually exciting. Got awesome new features.
It looks a lot like Orchard's project system, so you might like it.
We've got a new configuration system, which we're going to show as well. The new configuration system lets you basically use JSON files. You can use any files. You can potentially even use webconfig to read like the app settings section of webconfig, and you can use the environment as well. And you can stack these in the right order. So you could basically say, hey, I'm going to use a JSON config.json for my configuration, and then I'm going to do environment variables. And so what happens is locally you run against config.json, you publish to the cloud, and in the environment you set in the cloud, it will override the stuff in config.json. That's that cloud configuration scenario. We're taking a bunch of the frameworks and merging them together. The reason they're separate is just a point-in-time thing. They were built at different times, and we want to make some of them work potentially without system web. Like Web API was designed to work without system web. MVC was built when there was nothing but system web. And so we want to merge all these frameworks together now that we're in a new world. We can make these things come together. There's only one controller type that can do all these things. As I was saying, there is a breaking change, which is there is no system web. And some of the HP context stuff, there's a new lightweight replacement for it. So if you're actually depending on those things will both change quite a bit. And as I said, the final breaking change is the cloud-optimized version of .NET is just a smaller version. And then I think I have a summary here. I'll jump through this a little bit. And this kind of talks to What we're doing on the server has actually been done on the client already. It was done at the build conference for the client. So if you're building a Windows Store app or a Windows Phone app, at the build conference we announced something called native compilation. And basically, if you install that preview feature, when you build your app, we actually compile your app with the C++ compiler. We compile your C# app with the C++ compiler and compile the framework into your application. And so you actually get a single exe, and that contains all the framework that you're using, and it's all been compiled with the C++ compiler. So very little jitting has to occur there. It's super high fast. It also means like a Hello World app ends up being 2 megs. And that's a .NET Hello World app with garbage collection and the whole thing compiled down to 2 megs, and it depends on absolutely nothing. Meaning that the machine can change however it wants. Everything's compiled in the application. And so it's designed to work cross-device as well. So it's, whether it's a phone app or a store app, you can build one of these things. And that's kind of the device-optimized style of framework. And then we have what we're calling the cloud-optimized version. And that's what I was explaining to you guys. That's the .NET as a package that runs side by side, and it gives you the same benefits. It's going to give you the native compiled applications are going to have that side by side. The cloud apps have that side by side. Both of them target a smaller version of the framework, but I think it is the future. You're going to see us invest more and more in these areas, and at some point, these specialized versions of the framework will take over the bigger versions of the framework. And then, of course, beneath all these things, everybody in the .NET ecosystem will have access to, we have a new jitter, a 64-bit jitter that comes with the next version of .NET. We've got Roslyn, which is our new compilers that come with this. Brings new language features. And we have a new EF that comes as well that we're not going to get too far into today. And we're going to switch to you and
Sure.
do some demos?
Yeah, why not? You just want more slides? We can do more slides.
We have no more slides.
Oh, we can just do the same deck again. Okay, I'm going to have a seat here. Okay, so what we're going to do is walk you through almost everything Scott just talked about, and we're going to show how to do it in Visual Studio 14, which the preview of that just came out last week.
Last week.
I think it was.
Last week we shipped a preview of Dev 14, which will be the next version of Visual Studio. If you play with it, it is not safe to run side by side.
Don't do this.
Put it in a VM.
I have all my favorite Visual Studios. Don't do this.
So if you do that, I will just warn you now, things like C++ and TypeScript and stuff like that will not work together. The next, we plan to release more of these CTPs. The first thing, why don't we just start and do a file new app and show that things look kind of like they used to.
So right here we see this is this project template here. It's been a web application. That's what you've already seen. That's available in Visual Studio 2013. It's basically the same as it was before, but we have these 4 new ASP.NET vNext project templates.
Which we will consolidate into the one ASP.NET dialog once we get further along. We're just too early in to do that.
So create a default web application, and I'll go ahead and run it, and we'll see that despite the changes that Scott's been talking about, the world has changed, but there's still a lot of very familiar components in there. We see the same welcome page. We see the familiar content controllers, models, scripts, and views. Go ahead and run this application so we kind of play around with it and see what we have there. And then we'll start going into a few of the things that are brand new. Now, folks here in the audience are Orchard developers, so there's a lot of experiences in Orchard that we want to bring into every application. So this is a standard application, home, about, contact. It's built using MVC 6. That's the new version of MVC. I can register and log in. These are all familiar, I think, to everybody here. And now I'm building this app. I want to fix a bug, so I go back to Visual Studio. I'll go to my controller, and I want to change the message. And I'm going to do this with one hand so that everybody sees I'm not cheating anybody here. So what should I call this application? What's my application's name? Anybody have a? Nobody has. Steve. My Steve. Oh no, this is terrible. Orchard application description page. Okay, I'm just going to save. Okay, I'm going to switch back to my browser. I didn't compile. I'm going to hit refresh. Okay, I'm not touching anything over here. And then we're going to wait. We're actually recompiling the application in the background. This is something you're familiar with in Orchard, of course. And sure enough,
Takes too long today, but it will get faster.
oh yeah, the performance, this is super ultra early alpha bit, so the performance isn't quite there. We know a lot of the improvements. We're actually making some of those improvements right now. And in fact, as Scott mentioned, we're on GitHub. You can see the progress that we're making every day. The rest of the dev team is actually working today. I'm here, except for Taylor. Taylor's here, so he's not fixing any bugs. Yeah. So we saw this. This is already brand new. This is part of the fast development experience, except that it's not fast yet, but it's part of the development experience that we want to create as part of ASP.NET vNext. So what's in this application? Let's do a little bit of a tour through here. There's several new components here that you haven't seen before. Scott mentioned config.json, so I have some configuration settings in there. But I also have this project.json file, so let's take a look and see what's in there. This is, in place of a CS proj file, I now have a project.json. This is the so-called source of truth of my application. This is where I list all my dependencies. These are NuGet packages or perhaps other projects that this project depends on. I have some commands here, and I also have some framework-specific dependencies. So Scott mentioned there's the cloud-optimized.NET, and then there's the regular .NET that you have today. That's what these two versions are here. I have the net45 that's highlighted. That's the regular desktop.NET. That has your system.drawing. It has WinForms. It has WPF. It has everything in it. And then there's this K10, which is just a code that we're using right now. This is the cloud-optimized version of .NET. So in a traditional ASP.NET application, you have an application start event. That's pretty much the first line of code that runs in your application. That's where you might set up your dependency injection, set up any kinds of services or other settings that you need to enable in your application. Well, here we have something very similar. I have a configure method in my startup class, and this is, in fact, the first line of code that will run in my application. And there's a few stages here. We'll just ignore the browser link for right now, but let's
talk about browser link.
Okay,
let's talk about browser link. Remember we talked about modular opt-in? Even things like browser link don't work unless you actually enable them.
And I just opted out. See that? I didn't have to go to configuration. I didn't have to edit anything. I just commented out.
The point of the goal here, if you start looking at this, it's like, oh, use browser link. That's basically pointing out that you have to actually opt into anything that comes in. Nothing will be, you can turn everything off if you want easily. Nothing's built into some like mega framework that it's all on magic. You opt into stuff. Here's the configuration right below that I was just talking about. Notice that it says add JSON file, add environment variables. And that basically means that anything in my config.json can be configured. If something in the environment variable actually matches the same name, it will override the config.json. And now with Alon just added any file support.
Does Windows still have a win.ini? Is that still there?
It does.
Anybody know? Is it still in there for like some legacy
it's still in System 32.
16-bit app? We did a kind of some initial basic configuration. But now let's get to the super interesting part. Dependency injection is built in to the entire system. If you use today, an MVC has its dependency injection pattern. Web API has a different dependency injection pattern. Entity Framework has its dependency injection pattern. SignalR has its dependency injection pattern. Katana has its dependency injection pattern. And there's reasons for them. We won't go into that. But what I will go into is that there's one now. There's just one. And all these systems all use the same pattern. And we can actually see that right here. So here I register all the default services that each framework provides. So we go through register entity frameworks, default services, the identity for user and role management system, MVC. If I wanted to use SignalR, I would register SignalR in here. So register all the default services. And in just a bit, I'll show how to register a custom service that you might have. And then finally, we compose our ASP.NET vNext pipeline. How many here have used Katana and Owen middleware? People here used? A few people. So the idea here is we have a composable system. Much like you have modules that you might register in your web.config file, here you have middleware components that you can compose in a pipeline, and they can compose on top of each other. So we have a static file handler in here if you want to serve static files. Well, it's not in there by default. You have to say, I want to serve static files. There are, of course, a multitude of options that you can pass in to configure where you want to get static file. Oh, we'll get to that later. You can configure where you want to get static files. I want to enable cookie authentication. And then finally, I want to use MVC. And in the case of MVC, I also want to define my default routes. So a lot of this is very familiar. You still have MVC, you still have routes, you still have cookie authentication. It's composed on middleware, which some of you are already familiar with, and if not, you'll, over the coming years, no doubt become more and more familiar with it. What we want to do now is see if we can, actually, let's go to dependency injection. That's actually a fun topic. Here's my controller. And this is a very simple controller. This is our standard Hello World controller. I want to create a new service. Let's call it, let's create a new file in here. We'll add a service called IApp name service. Delete all this extra code. So I have an interface. Wrong button. Interface IApp name service, and this has a string get app name. And then I need a concrete implementation of this, public class app name service, implements the interface. And let's see, what was Steve Orchard, I think, was our, does anybody have a better name? I mean, Steve's a great name, but Orchard's all right too. I'll just go with it. Steve Orchard. So we've defined a service, and we've defined an implementation of that service, and that's wonderful. Oh, I'm missing a curly brace here, I think. Okay. Now in my controller, I want to take advantage of this. So let's create a constructor, and we need a place to store our service. So I'll create a property, IApp name service, and I need to acquire this service somehow. So let me include that in my constructor. And then I'll just hold on to this here. Name service equals name service. So this is a pretty familiar pattern. It's called constructor injection. You've probably seen it before if you've built applications. I'll compile my application, make sure I'm all good. So I can still compile in Visual Studio. And then let me just refresh the page and see what happens. And it's going to blow up, but it's on purpose, so I'm just telling you. Oh no, what has happened? Let's take a look here. This was on purpose. This is on purpose. Oh yeah, we have the, we cloned a certain other well-known blue screen. Yeah. So let's see what this error here is. In fact, this is how you know it's preview bits, because the error messages themselves have to-do colon in them. It's pretty awesome. I think that's since been fixed. I'm running a build that's a week or two old, but this tells you it's genuinely, it's not even beta. This is like pre-alpha bits. But let's see what this error is here. It's unable to resolve service IApp name service in order to create my home controller. Well, of course it doesn't know how to create it, because I didn't tell it what services I have available. But right before we do that, this error page, I mean, it's kind of nice, but it's a little bit difficult to work with. It doesn't really have any line numbers on here. It's a little bit, I don't know, kludgy. Now, let's show one of the next cool features, which is I want to bring in a better error page into my application. So that's the default, most basic one that comes with. It's got a sideways frowny face and shows a stack trace. That's nice, but I think we can do a little bit better than that. So let's take a look at one of the new features that's available in Visual Studio 14. So this is a plain old JSON file. This is that configuration file for my project that we saw earlier. Check this out. IntelliSense inside a JSON file. How many here have seen that before? Yeah, I didn't think so. Let's scroll down. Let's scroll down. Then there's a diagnostics package here, Microsoft.asp.net.diagnostics. So I got IntelliSense for that. In fact, I even get IntelliSense for which versions are available. So I happen to have this version already installed on my machine. It came with a preview of Visual Studio. So we'll enable that. Now, as I'm saved, we see here at the bottom, Visual Studio, like where did it get that package? It did an automatic NuGet package restore just by virtue of changing my project file. Now, you know in Visual Studio, if you ever edit the CS project file outside of Visual Studio, what does Visual Studio says? It says, I'm going to throw away all your work so I can reload this project. We said no. We're going to do this all in the background. We'll gracefully detect the changes. We'll gracefully restore the packages. In fact, if we look in the references node, we see this is actually a brand new references node. And we see these are now, this is a hierarchical view of all the packages. So I can see I just included the diagnostics package. This uses a few other packages, which then depend on other packages and so forth. This is all brand new in Visual Studio 14.
Packages are now a first-class citizen in Visual Studio.
Absolutely, NuGet for everything. Okay, so I've included the diagnostics package in my application, but I need to actually start using it. So I'll go back to my startup page. And right here as the first middleware component, I'll say add error page. I'll say app.use. And here I have this error page, and this came from the package that I just downloaded. I'll save that, and let's see that we should still get an error, because remember, I didn't actually fix my application. All I did is install a better error page. So hopefully that works, because I don't know what happens if your error page doesn't work. Oh, here we go. OK, cool. So let me kind of zoom in a little bit. So we still see the same errors and everything, but this is much more improved. We can now see various information about the request. Well, I don't have any query string or cookies, but we can see headers, environment. This is really useful stuff when you're debugging. I think if I...
So it's been a breaking change to changes in the .NET framework.
Yeah. Yeah, so here we can do whatever we want. So we have a much nicer error page, but I still need to go fix the error. Obviously, I haven't actually fixed the error yet. So the problem is that I never registered my service. So dependency injection is built into the system. So here I want to add name service. And I want to say services dot add. Let me zoom in just a little bit there. And there are, we see here all the default, we have add entity framework, add identity entity framework. I don't know, that kind of sounds kind of funny. I think we changed the name since then, I think. Add MVC, but we have 3 different life cycles of services. We have scope services that are per request. We have singleton scopes that are for the entire lifetime of the application, and we have transient lifecycle, which is just create me a new service every time, create me a new service instance every time you ask for it. This is totally standard dependency injection stuff. If you've used DI before, it's all super, super familiar. I'm going to go with singleton is actually probably all I need for this, and I have an app name service, and my implementation is called app name service as well. So I'll register that, hit save. And now we'll refresh, and this hopefully should compile at least, but we're not actually using the service yet. I should note that we have a built-in kind of default dependency injection implementation that just knows how to do constructor injection and nothing more, and supports these scopes. If you want to use an inject, autofac, structure map, Unity, Castle Windsor, do we have any others that we're working on? That's probably all the ones that we have prototypes of how to wire up any of the existing popular .NET dependency injection systems into the system. And once you do that, you can then take advantage of the more advanced features that they have. So if you just want to get started, just like I'm doing here, out of the box, you got everything you need. OK, now let's go use the service, because we didn't actually call into it. So I don't want to hard code the string. I want to get it from my service. So I have my app name service, and I want to call name service dot get app name. Let's go change the name so that way it's clear. Otherwise, you won't see the change. OK, I need a better name.
Harvest.
Harvest. OK, let's go with harvest.
Nice.
So original. So here, refresh, and then it should be consuming my service. And now we have harvest application. We saw this used my new service that I registered, all using built-in components. We had a nice error page. Everything was absolutely wonderful. Let's see, should I show, I'll create a class library. What a class library? OK, class library.
I guess we can assume that we have to edit in debug mode now, right?
You can edit, yeah, you can edit whatever you want.
So we right,
Oh, can you edit that? You can edit while debugging, I think, but it won't actually see your changes until you do have to restart the application to see the changes.
So the feature he's asking for is edit and continue, and MVC and Web API have always struggled with edit continue because we use language features that the debugger team doesn't support. Things like anything that returns dynamic doesn't support that stuff. So there's a lot of stuff that we do that doesn't work. We're working to see if we can get that resolved. If it all comes out to be a perfect world, we'll try to get edit and continue working.
Sorry, I thought that was a softball question.
No. Not all our team users, I was saying.
One day.
Actually, the debugger team that needs to help us here as well.
So one of the things that Scott mentioned is how you can choose your own tools. You don't have to use Visual Studio. The Primo experience is in Visual Studio. You get the IntelliSense. You saw JSON IntelliSense, the automatic package restore. But we also have still a really rich experience when you're using other tools like Notepad and Windows Explorer. So everything so far in the project, I mean, this is a super realistic application. I'm using DI. I mean, that's as real as an application gets. But I want to move my service to another project because I'm into a class library project. So I might want to share that with other projects that I build. I might need an app name service somewhere else. So this is the project where we're at, Web Application 9. Here's how I'm going to create another project. I'm not going to use Visual Studio at all. Create a folder. Let's call it name service lib. I'll create, oh, where am I here? I'll create a project.json file, because we saw project.json is the source of truth. Zoom out a little bit. Now, all I need here is just a valid JSON file, because this doesn't have any dependencies. It's just a really simple class library. If I wanted to, I could define my dependencies in here and everything, or configuration options. It's just an empty project.json. And then what I'm going to do is go back to my application here. And this is that app name service that we just created with the harvest app name. I'll just move that over to my class library. So this is actually a complete project right now. Project.json plus a CS file, that's a project. That's all I need. But I need to reference it from my other project. So let's make that go away. And we see here my application now, it doesn't compile anymore because I got rid of this application name service, but I'm not referencing it back again. So what do I do here? Let me open this references node and then see if I can actually get this all to work. Edit the project.json of my application. Let me do this part from within Visual Studio because that's also really cool. Go to project.json, and remember that IntelliSense? Let me quote here. Hey, look at that. Name service lib. I didn't have to create a CS proj or a K proj or anything proj. It knows, by virtue of there being a folder with a project.json in it near this other program, that I have a reference. And so I'll just include that. Hit save. And then here, let's see. So here you see it actually detected the project. So Solution Explorer has been updated to indicate the new project. And down here, name service lib is now referenced because I added it to my project.json. Visual Studio did not prompt me to reload and throw away all my work and all these kinds of crazy things.
You have to go to the add dialogues and have it modify some CS proj file.
So now, when we go back here to my application, name service, it finds the reference. I can F12 on this, and it goes to my name service lib project, and there you have it. I have my full application with a class library. I didn't have to compile anything manually. If I can go hit refresh, and this will all work as well.
Fun, show also that you can go to the class library and modify the code.
Oh, yeah.
And the compilation is not just for the web application. It's anything that you reference. So if Alon goes and modifies the source code.
What's another name? Harvest isn't good anymore. Hashbang?
Hashbang.
Hashbang. As in like that? Oh, I missed the earlier.
That's the word, hash bang.
Hash bang. OK, so hash bang with a bunch of stuff. So all I did is hit save there, and then I'll go to my application. Remember, this is a class library. This is not even in my web app. This is just a class library. Hit refresh, wait a few moments. We're loading up Roslyn, getting it to compile. We're restarting the app. And 3, 2, 1. There you go, automatically. So all these experiences work throughout the various components as long as they're somehow referenced by your project. We have file listeners listening to everything. Again, you all know Orchard. It's that same type of experience we want to bring to all ASP.NET development.
Want to show command line?
I can try.
So one of the things is, as I was saying before, cross-platform is very interesting to us. And if you are cross-platform, you don't have VS. How do you run your application? How do you try your application? So pretty much everything we're showing you today works from the command line as well. So you don't actually have to be in Visual Studio or even have Visual Studio installed to actually run this.
So just open a standard command line. I'm going to go to my web application folder. And we have, so I guess I can just do kweb and show how. So earlier I was.
Okay, web, why don't you go and load up the project.json file and show where the commands are.
Oh, yeah. So we saw a quick look at this earlier in the project.json file. We have this command section I just mentioned earlier, but I didn't actually go into it. You can register custom commands with the project. So if you, let's say, want to run unit tests, or you want to have like a debug version or release version where you want slightly different command line parameters, this is where you do that. So there's a web command registered by default in all web applications. And every application needs a program main, ultimately. So the program main, in the case of a web application, isn't in my application. It's in a hosting assembly, which will then locate my configuration method. And then there's a bunch of other parameters here, like which listener we want to use, and then other settings, such as the port to listen to. So we can, what's a good number? Is there a good number?
32764.
I heard 4379. Does that mean something? Is that the last 4 digits of your social security number? Okay. I got to leave early, by the way. So I'll save this over here, and then I can run k web, because k is kind of our loader, and then web is the command that I want it to run. And so again, this is, you see all the debug spew here. It's loading Roslyn, and it's, so we see here, if I click here, so we have a NuGet assembly loader, because a lot of things come from packages. There's the Roslyn compiler that we're loading up here. So all this debug spew, okay, started. If I go to localhost, was 4379. Oops. And here we have that same application. If I go to the About page, I should have that same hashbang thing right in there. And so you can register other commands. This is self-hosting, so this isn't even running an IIS right now. This is a custom web server that we have. Earlier, I was running an IIS Express that comes in Visual Studio. In the case of Kweb, I'm doing command line with a custom web server. This is also how we get things to run on things like Mac and Linux. You can use the same variation of the command line there. It's a bash script instead of a Windows, CMD file, but same basic idea. Anything else worth showing?
So if you want to show one more final thing, you can show file new with like an empty project.
Oh,
Show
yeah.
how basic of an app you can actually build.
Yeah, so this was basically an MVC application. So there's another project template in here, ASP.NET vNext, empty web application. And this time when we say empty, we mean empty.
It won't be this empty when we ship, but it's really empty right now.
Let's not ruin it for everybody. So let's take a look at the project.json. It's referencing Helios. Okay, it's not completely empty, but Helios is the code name for our loader that allows applications to run in IIS. So that's just the minimum to get things to run in IIS. And then I have nothing else. I have a startup.cs that's empty. And so here I can say app.run, async context. I'm just defining a lambda that I want to run for every single request that comes into the application. And all I'm going to do is do context.response.write async. OK, I need another name. I'm running out of strings. Come on, somebody. WordPress? Ah, OK. Orchard Press. How about Orchard Press? So this is just about the simplest ASP.NET vNext application you can have, and I can run this. This will probably load actually a little bit more quickly because it's not loading a whole lot. It's just I have one .cs file to compile. I'm not referencing a lot of stuff. I don't have to dig into NuGet packages to find references, but there you have it, a one-line Hello World program. If you think about in previous versions of ASP.NET and MVC, Hello World, it's actually quite a bit. You have to kind of set up a whole bunch of stuff just to get to the one-line code where you want to say hello world. So here
This app, there's no routing, there's no session, there's no cache, there's no error page, there's no static files, there's no nothing. So you can dial it as big or small as you want.
So here's just the very last thing I want to show, because I think we're totally out of time. We want to have a few minutes for questions. These are all the various NuGet packages that are involved kind of in the story. So there might be a lot of them, but they're very, very small. They're very modular. You can include, exclude, whatever it is you need. So we have loaders. We have our dependency injection. Here you see all these .NET Framework packages, all the system stuff. So there's a whole bunch of those. I think that's about everything. So we have 7 minutes for questions. Oh, I also want to plug, Taylor, can you stand up for a second? So Taylor is one of the guys on my team. He worked on SignalR. He works on Razor and MVC right now. He's doing a session tomorrow morning at 10. And he's going to kind of continue where we left off. He's going to do the super ultra deep dive. We did kind of the management demo, the program manager lead, the dev manager. He's doing like the dev, nerdy, hardcore stuff that I think will resonate even more with
More
folks in
command
the
line,
audience.
multiple CLRs at the same time running, all kinds of crazy stuff.
Yeah, so stuff that we talk. Yeah, yeah, one slide.
So a demo that we didn't get to do today, what's really cool, is you can take the app that Alon was building, you can publish it to like a folder on your machine. Because the framework is part of the app, you can put it on a memory stick, walk to anybody's machine. It requires 8.1 today, Windows, but any 8.1 Windows machine, put the memory stick in, run the batch file, the web server will start up, and your app will run without installing any framework on your machine. So that's showing that the whole app is in that folder.
CLR, everything. CLR, MVC, your app code, everything. NuGet packages.
That's fantastic. Were there questions in the audience?
Question here?
Mr. 4379. That's burned in here. I'm going to the bank.
That's really cool, and thanks. And just more of a comment or almost concern. When I see an automatic reference between projects like that I don't like that. I don't want my web application to know that Entity Framework exists. That lives in its own project, and the web application doesn't have a reference to it. Surely you guys have thought of that, and that's not going to be a problem, and we're going to be able to turn that kind of stuff off, right?
So the application, I want to make sure I understand the question. The application does not know about Entity Framework by any means. The project.json file is where you specify everything. So I could very well have I could have removed Entity Framework from my web application, and I could have had my class library depend on Entity Framework, and then my web application knows nothing about it. It just knows about
But
my class
unfortunately,
library.
your web application knows about your name service application project. It's not. We don't necessarily want that.
It doesn't know about it.
Doesn't
So
know.
all that happened was the IntelliSense knew about it.
Oh, okay.
yeah.
He put the
I
reference.
see.
He put the reference in by hand. All that
Oh,
happened
the reference
was
didn't happen by
no.
by
The references don't
automatically.
happen by hand. So when he put
Good.
the reference in is when the node showed up in the tree
Yeah,
because
yeah.
he referenced it. Nothing happens automatically.
Oh, see.
Everything requires you to declare it. So if you scroll up here, name service lib : quote.
Yeah, so if you look here, I'll do the reverse. I'll remove name service lib. Now, I could go to Solution Explorer, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do it the new way. So there's name service lib. I'm going to go here, and I'm going to delete this line of JSON code. I'm going to save, and then watch here.
Disappear.
Gone. I didn't refresh anything. That's because it's in the solution. That's because it's in the solution. So my project, however, is not referencing that name service lib. It's just in the solution. Yeah, if we go back to my home controller, we'll see, well, it's waking up, but there you go. It's all errors. My startup.
There's no magic. One of the goals in the vNext stuff is there's less magic than there was before.
Yeah, a lot less.
Everything is declared.
Absolutely. Yeah, great question.
I'm a relatively new developer, and I'm really interested in the next 2 years or so to become a MVP in ASP.NET or in open source or in Azure. And I'm wondering if there's a possibility for someone who's focusing really deeply or trying to on Orchard to become an MVP through contributions to Orchard in the open source community.
Yes. So the answer to that would be yes. Very easily you can. In fact, one of the things we announced at the Build conference was we now have the ability to make somebody an MVP solely based on their open source commitments. So if you have a great open source project that's being consumed by Orchard, that is actually technically enough and it has enough interest, that's enough to be an MVP today. So no longer do you have to, write a million blog posts or write a book or go fly around the world and talk to a bunch of folks. If you're making awesome contributions to Orchard and you're making cool plugins that plug into Orchard, and Sebastian calls me and says, Scott, we should make this guy an MVP, we can get you on the list.
That's fantastic.
But you got to convince Sebastian.
Not quite yet. I'm still just a hack.
So my question's a little bit more on the sense of just more open source, because I'm from Outer Curve. Has there been any consideration about changing the NuGet package licenses away from a EULA, even for open source packages? Currently, the MVC packages are, or the source is under Apache, but the packages themselves are under a EULA. I know the Azure. I spoke with the Azure SDK people, and they work through whatever needed to be happen legally to get it done on their NuGet packages.
What change do you want on the EULAs? The EULAs that we have on all of our framework packages now,
I want them to be open source as well, the license.
that probably won't happen. The packages as we build them are compiled by Microsoft. They have Microsoft keys in them, and they have a Microsoft support policy associated with them, so you can call us up and we'll support them. That's why they have a EULA associated with them. But if you read the EULA lets you do anything you want with them now. So we used to have a restrictive EULA. No, we had a EULA before. You can go run them on Linux. You can go run them on Mac. You can go run them anywhere. There is no restrictions on the license anymore at all.
Unfortunately, they're not open source compatible, the licenses, in that respect.
What does that mean?
It means that if you put them into your package, there's a debate whether that's considered open source still. For example, the Apache Foundation would not let you depend on the binaries anymore if you did that. If one of their projects had that.
Talk to me afterwards.
Okay.
We don't think there's, as a company, I can tell you that we have no restrictions on those things. We would not take any action on anybody no matter what on those packages. We changed that earlier this spring because we used to have very restrictive licenses on our packages, and we removed all of that stuff. We want people to do, you can, as far as I'm concerned, and my legal team would be concerned, you can do whatever you want with that binary. We don't care. And if we need to state that somewhere or be stronger about that, we're more than happy to do that.
So also, if you do, so yeah, we can definitely follow up on that afterwards. If you do want to check out the open source repository, github.com/ASP.NET. This is where all the new vNext stuff is, including also entity framework, identity, SignalR, a lot of middleware, routing. We have some sample apps. There's the music store sample app in there, Razor, the entire universe is in there if you want.
And who came up with the name vNext? What's after vNext?
Oh, vNext.
vNext technically means we have not named vNext yet, and so...
Well, he asked what's after vNext. The answer is vNext next.
vNext next would be after vNext.
vNext, is that right?
But vNext technically means that we're showing you stuff before the Microsoft marketing team has decided what they're going to call it.
Okay, all right, got it.
Are we? Is this .NET 4.6? Is it .NET 5? Is it .NET 6? That's really the...
Is there any plans to port Visual Studio over to Mac?
Port Visual Studio to Mac?
What's the point of me? I
want you to say no. There is.
I don't think that the technical work required to do that would not be worth what it would take to do so, unfortunately. Cloud. And cloud, yes. I think the reality is, Alon brings a great point. It's something we have, we're calling Visual Studio Online, which is coming, you're going to see more and more functionality move into Visual Studio Online. The Monaco editor I was talking about, don't be surprised within a year or two, you can edit, compile the whole thing in the cloud as well. So if you want the cross-plat VS experience, it's going to be more through VS Online. Trying to port VS to a Mac, I would love to see that happen, but I just know that, God, the effort to do that. That thing depends on so many weird Windows features that...
Full stop.
Every Microsoft technology you can think of for the last 20 years is in Visual Studio. Seriously, COM Plus, .NET, who knows what else.
So the web-based version that's online, could that be ported to sort of a light version for Mac? So like a web version? Yeah, but with a bit more.
Well, I think the answer is that there aren't any current plans, Tony, that I know of.
I'm not aware of any either.
He's a little bit above my pay grade, and he doesn't apparently know either. Yeah, it would be wonderful. I mean, I think the two of us agree. I think the audience would agree.
I would love to see it.
Is the emphasis on multi-platform, is that really just the web and the cloud team, or does that also apply to things like WPF and WinForms?
I can't comment on that. I would say the web team especially is, yeah, it's important to us, but we did announce a partnership with Xamarin on the C# side around Build Conference, where if you're an MSDN subscriber, we're going to give you a discount on the Xamarin tools. So there's a partnership going on there to make C# cross-plat, be more of a VS feature. We announced at TechEd something called Cordova support for Visual Studio that takes PhoneGap and lets you build PhoneGap applications that run on iOS, Android, and Windows. And so if you just read the tea leaves there, I think you can say that it looks like that we are becoming more open in that area. And obviously, our team is hardcore into that area. We believe it strongly.
Wait, what's the time frame on having a side-by-side version?
So the side-by-side stuff that we showed today, it'll work. It'll actually work today if you download the preview. The RTM of this,
The ability to run it safely side-by-side with the other versions.
the stuff we have today is safe side-by-side. So
The
let me explain.
version of Visual Studio is currently not safe side by side.
But the actual running, the running code is safe. If you want to go run your app, you can go put your app on a server today, and it will not affect the server. When it comes to Visual Studio, we shipped the first CTP of VS just last week. We plan to be pretty aggressive on these things. Maybe every month there'll be a new CTP until we get to a public beta. Right now, their hope is the next CTP that releases will be side-by-side safe.
Thank you.
It was a last-minute thing that we didn't realize until a week before last week that there were 600 bugs on side-by-side.
What's the target RTM?
We can't talk about those dates because we don't own those dates. But once again, I would just, how fast have we been shipping Visual Studio on Windows the last couple of years?
One last question over here.
Hi. I was wondering, where do you guys see, because I know that Orchard have got a steering committee and so on and so forth, but where do you guys see Orchard going from, being Sebastian's boss? So, what do you guys see with Orchard going forward?
Yeah. So I am Sebastian's boss, and for the rest of this week, he can continue working on Orchard.
actually, more so.
By the way, you missed 3 days of work this week.
What I really want is I want to see Orchard move to this platform as soon as possible. That's what I want to see for Orchard. Is I want to see Sebastian work, and maybe we get more resources to get Orchard onto the new platform as soon as possible.
Yeah, I was talking to Sebastian, and I was also talking to Bertrand yesterday. It would be wonderful to get Orchard on this new platform for a variety of reasons. I think it'd be really good for the Orchard ecosystem and the code base, because Orchard has to worry perhaps about fewer things in the system, because Sebastian is in all the design meetings, well, not all the design meetings, but very many of the design meetings in this. So if you see him like he can't attend a meeting, it's for Orchard, it's probably because he's helping out on this stuff. Not to take away time, he is shaking his head, but it's true. Not to take away time from Orchard, but to create the value here, which then translates into value back into Orchard. Orchard is one of the biggest ASP.NET applications there is, certainly from an open source perspective. And the types of things that Orchard does everything. It really does every single multi-tenant with dependency injection and modular applications, runtime compilation, head explosion type of stuff. This type of stuff, you saw it just now. You saw a lot of this type of stuff in here. So we're trying to feed that value from Orchard back into the system and then back into Orchard again. So we're using Orchard and many other applications as well, but Orchard in particular, because Sebastian is in our team room to help drive the direction. Like, what should the new MVC look like? What should routing look like? How should Entity Framework work? Does Orchard use Entity Framework today? Nope. Why not? What can we do in the next version of Entity Framework so that it doesn't have to use a new version of Entity Framework, but we want it to be possible to use it at least. I think Sebastian wanted to add something.
There are already some parts of Orchard in the Orchard IDs into this code. The authorization and security stuff, the authorized attribute is based on Orchard IDs and principles, so it's already there.
Yeah, so just so everybody can hear, Orchard's authorization pattern is actually something that is in this code base. If you go here today, you'll see the same type of pattern for the authorized attribute. We actually said, actually you wrote the code, I think, right?
That's why.
Yeah. No, but we said.
I want to add one more thing. We're talking about like low-level nuts and bits here with how we're developing it, but I think it's Microsoft. One of the things we'd love to do, and hopefully we'll get it done this year, we would love to have Orchard Orchard be a software as a service inside of Azure. Today you can go to the Azure gallery and you can say I want Orchard, and it'll if you create a SQL database and all the right bits, we'll let you hook it all together. But what if you just went to Azure and you just said I want a CMS, and it gave you a fully working CMS in one click? That's something I think you'll see us do soon in the next year, where Orchard's one click, you're done. And your bill would be based on that as well. It's like your bill contains whatever cache you need, whatever website you need, whatever SQL you need, all as a service, as a standalone service that you don't have to maintain or message at all. That's something I think from a Microsoft perspective outside of the ASP.NET team that you might see us do with Orchard in the next 6 to 12 months.
I think that's the best way to end it. Thank you very much.